Mansplaining, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Welcome back to the show. Christian, how's it going?
Good as always, just protecting the honeymoon.
The honeymoon. Yeah, you're gonna have to explain that to me at some point, but that's awesome.
yeah,
All right,
yeah.
great. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a fun one for you today. Of course, as many of you know, Trump met with Putin from Russia in Alaska, where they were, in theory, to discuss a potential ceasefire, or at least, to get the ball rolling. Kind of an icebreaker.
That's what it was. I mean, it was a summit between the two leaders. Who knows what they talked about behind the closed doors? But that was one of the things that it was that they would want to talk about. Yeah,
precisely right. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and say it. I mean, ever since that moment, it seems like both sides of the aisle have kind of like lost their mind over this one meeting, which, to the best of my understanding, really wasn't supposed to ever accomplish anything material, right? It was just supposed to like set the table, like get the ball rolling, try to get back into the framework of a ceasefire and stuff. But like, the left is like, see, he didn't end the war with a single stroke. Checkmate, Republicans. And I'm like, yeah. And then the right is like, wow, what a power move. What that Trump sure is an alpha. What an amazing, like, he really made Putin like cower in awe. And I'm like, okay. And me, I'm just sitting here watching. I'm like, okay, this was a meeting. Right? Yeah. It's just that's it. It was a meeting. And it wasn't even, like, just so that everybody understands, it wasn't even a meeting where we were negotiating something for America. We're just arbitrating for two other nations, one of which wasn't even present, right? So, like, I'm really not sure what the expectation was going into this meeting. I'm trying to wrap my head around this thing, but like, the only thing that we could ever have done is, show up and say, hey, can we have a ceasefire? If so, what would your, list of desires be? Let's just get the ball rolling and stuff like that. And obviously, that's all, because Trump can't tell Putin that Zelensky is going to capitulate to something without Zelensky present, right? Like, maybe maybe you can mansplain it to me. Like, what am I?
Right. So here, let me mansplain this a little bit. So yeah, Trump and Putin have met before, obviously, but this is the first time in this presidency. And this is a time. A summit is a chance for the leaders to talk to each other without handlers, without something being recorded online and being official, and I think it's a chance to size up if anything's changed. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Trump was out of office. Trump is definitely sort of a little more focused or things like that. Is this still the same Putin? I know for a long time, the take, at least the Republicans' take, and maybe Trump's take, was to treat Putin like he was an oil CEO.
Yeah.
Right? He was concerned with the oil profits of Russia, and Ukraine was just something that got in the way of his oil profits. And so, right, that's what I was understanding now. Has that changed, right? This is the type of thing. Is it because of what's happened since the Biden administration?
Right.
Has it changed? Has this become an emotional thing where he can't give up because he's got to save face, even though, right, or whatever. So I think it's a type of sizing that up thing, away from all our handlers and that, yeah. Negotiating a peace wasn't, I don't think, something, because it wasn't us that we're not seeking peace, we're not war with it.
Right. Yeah, okay, that makes some sense. I mean, as I'm watching this and I'm watching the reactions, everybody's losing their mind, of course. But I mean, this whole time I'm just like, what's the punchline?
All you want to figure out is, has something changed?
Right.
And what are his new priorities? Should we be evaluating and considering them the same ways, or is it different? Right? Is this
right.
And who knows what he discovered? But ostensibly, they'd go back to their State Department with new information and how to approach Russia. I know what Trump has been sort of de-escalating sanctions gradually with Russia. He's not as knee-jerk against them, but they are still a geopolitical foe. They still want to oppose the West. They want to create this new standard that's not the U.S. dollar for trade and things like that. The Trump really opposes,
Yeah,
and is against them. But he
me too.
is still trying to decide, like, is Putin trying to be a jerk, or what are really his interests? What are his top interests? Is it oil
Right.
proceeds? Is it is territory really a big deal? Is it just he wants to just stick it to the Ukrainians as far as a pride thing? Like,
Yeah. At this point, I mean, I have to imagine, although, obviously we weren't flies on the wall there. We weren't invited to watch the actual proceeding, but I have to imagine that there's got to be a certain amount of like, he's pot invested, right? Like at this point, I mean, just to let everybody know kind of what this whole conflict is truly one of the tragedies of our time. It really is, because I feel like, number one, I feel like it was largely avoidable altogether. Like, and I think in no small part to Biden's administration and our involvement, the American involvement in this situation. I think that we were a heavy portion of why this conflict even took place. And I'm not saying that it could not, maybe it couldn't have been avoided, maybe, but maybe it could have. And we certainly weren't trying to like make us avoid it. Like we definitely didn't lead by strength. We also, we projected a lot of weakness on the global stage, but we also, like for those of you who are not familiar with the ins and outs, there was a peace deal that was essentially on the table before any invasion took place in February of 2022. There was a piece of paper that had already been signed and initialed, and both parties were cool with it. And then America was like, no, 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 don't do that. We'll back you.
Biden, yeah.
Yeah, Biden, Blinken, right? Like went and said, and so I mean, in no small part, one, this thing could have been avoided altogether. But the other thing too is the way that it's been managed since then. Up until President Trump got back in office, has just been, in my opinion, abysmal. It's just been very, very poor, and it has led to essentially the maximum loss of human life. Right? Like I've always said from the very beginning that there were always three ways that we could handle this situation. We could just leave it alone, just wash our hands of it, say, look, this is on the other side of the world. We're not allies with Ukraine. It's not our business. That was one option. Maybe not the best, but one. We could have gone to war with Russia. We could have said, look, this is just absolutely unacceptable for you just to start, disrespecting the sovereignty of other nations. And we're effectively the global police force because we're the biggest and the strongest. That was option number two. And the third option, which I just have to say was the worst of all worlds, was for us to slow walk aid so that Ukraine was like almost on parity with Russia and almost able to fight them off, but not quite. And so, like, meanwhile, like both nations just sort of like bleed their reservoirs dry. And ever since then, I mean, this has just been a horrible, horrible tragedy that this conflict ever reached the area that it is. Yeah.
All right. So, obviously, the Democrats own this. This is a Biden decision. Biden has, right, to not mansplain this more, but Biden has connections to Ukraine that are, we would say, compromised.
Yeah.
Right. His family connections. His son had, was this job that funneled a lot of money to the Bidens,
And the Clintons
for
too,
influence, right?
Yeah.
Right, the exchanges that they were getting all this money so that Biden would, have their back or da 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 da. They've been
Right.
essentially buying Biden off for a long time, and it cashed in for them.
Right.
Where right. So Trump has long been critical of that, called
Right.
out that corruption in Hunter Biden, and so he's been uncomfortable with supporting Ukraine on those grounds, corruption grounds, and that there's corruption within the Ukraine, as far as where the money's going, right?
Right.
And there's been a lot of reports about that, but that's not to excuse that Ukraine is not a sovereign nation that should and has every right to defend their territory. That Russia's incursion and invasion of the territory is not justified, is a
Correct.
blanket aggression.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So all that needs to, but Trump's sort of ambivalence about that, right, is because he is a partisan, how he was treated, and he sees the Bidens as not being objective
Right.
in their analysis of this war. They were compromised, and
Right.
so so those are things that complicated the war. Obviously, Europe should be more involved in that. Initially, they weren't stepping up.
Right.
Right? They were just expecting us to do everything,
Of course.
and that was kind of like, whoa. Europe has, that's one thing with the Republican Congress making it sort of hard for funding to come through. They ultimately did, but
Right.
making it not a rubber stamp,
Right.
made Europe have to step up and say like, okay, this is on our doorstep. What are we going to take ownership of it, or at least more ownership of it?
Right. Right. And yeah, of course, Trump has, of course, been much better about getting NATO to fulfill their part of the bargain. Actually put in some of their budget towards defense, and not just us be the only ones to sign off on this thing. But yeah, so this really has been just a true tragedy of our time, and it's a good thing that Trump is addressing it now. Obviously, one of the things that Trump has said from the very beginning is that this would never happen under his watch, and he's probably correct.
Putin said that. Putin said that.
Putin, yeah,
right? He said he would not have attacked if Trump had been president instead of Biden.
Right, absolutely. Now, the other side of this coin, though, is that Trump also said that he would, wave the magic wand and fix this within 24 hours. Now, I think that was a little bit optimistic. And of course, as with everything else that Trump says, the left is very, very quick to not be able to discern the difference between Trump hyperbole and Trump reality, right? So, of course, he says, I'd fix it in 24 hours. That means I would fix it quickly. And honestly, if he can get it done this year, I'm going to be happy, right? Now,
that would be really, really fast for a quagmire this big.
Right. This is like I said, this is a slog. And I mean, yeah. So Matthew asks, was there any progress toward peace? I mean, it depends on what you count as progress. Now, what I'll say is anytime there is a peace talk, there's progress, right? There's something being done. The fact that Trump is even getting involved. I mean, Trump even said in an interview afterwards, this is just really a distraction for him. He's plenty of stuff to do in America, right? He's trying to manage DC. He's trying to do a million other things, handle 5,000 lawsuits at the same time, trying to, clean up crime, trying to do this, that, and the other. This really isn't his job, but he's doing it anyway. He's like, look, I'm going to do this anyway. I'm going to help out. I'll arbitrate. And so the fact that he's even willing to step in the first place is a feather in his cap. Now, they didn't sign an agreement. It's not like he got Putin to agree to a ceasefire right away. And I don't think that was ever on the table, right? And so for anybody out there who's like, look, he didn't solve this in 24 hours.
Trump didn't come in with terms and put it on the table and say, here, this is what we want. It was really, I think, a conversation between the two of them, trying to get what you want is trying to get Putin to be frank about what Putin wants. Right. We know, we've heard the propaganda, but if he would tell Trump sort of what he really wants, something realistically that Putin would be happy with, that he would say that, right? So Russian propaganda is such a thing that we have to, the common man are very skeptical of. The media is so easily taken by it. Yeah. It's interesting, just in our history, we thought for a long time we were losing the Cold War, right? Because of Russian propaganda. Made it look like, they only ever let the press or foreign people go to St. Petersburg or Moscow, right? And those two cities looked like they were like real cities. While the rest of the country was collapsing in complete poverty and deprivation, right? And exposing the communist system, they were able to exploit those areas to make Moscow and St. Petersburg look like real European cities. And that fooled so much. And then propaganda and things like that. So we have to take, and once the war was over, we saw through all that, right? The real truth came out. And so that's why anything the Russian says, especially a KGB officer, we have to take it as gospel that we're being spun, and try to read between the lines and not take it as, all right, this is a favorable portrayal according to what Russia wants us to believe about their strength, about their noble intentions, about whatever, right? We need to investigate further. But so long the media has just been willing to accept those. It's interesting now that the Democrat Party owns Ukraine.
Yeah.
now they're finally being very critical. Anything Russia is now evil,
All
and
of a sudden,
they're right. But that's a new thing for them. That's a big twist.
absolutely. Well, and so, all right. So, as far as the progress is concerned, right? So, what I understand took place, which is minimal, but I understand that the Trump went in, was probably hoping for a few more concessions than Putin was willing to give. Came back and said, I think Putin laid some demands out for Trump to relay to Zelensky, which I believe he did. And then, of course, Trump, I think, ascertained that that Putin's heart isn't really in any kind of ceasefire. And of course, understandably, why would Putin have his heart? I mean, Putin has all the cards, and this is the big thing that I think people are not understanding. Putin is winning this war, for better or for worse. And I hate that
at great cost. At great cost.
At great cost.
Yeah.
At great cost. Well, at great cost to the manpower, the personnel of Russia, right? And at great cost to their budget, but not at great cost to Putin personally. One of the truly unfortunate things about Putin is he's ruthless. Like ruthless in a psychopathic way. Like he just does not care about human life. If you guys watched some of the strategic battles that I've watched, the war games that I've watched, like Putin would literally go into some of these battles and he could put out air support to defend his people, and win the land, win the territory, protect his guys. But instead, he's like, oh no, I don't want to lose a plane. Let's just lose an extra 5,000 men. And it's like, whoa, that's the kind of sociopathic.
Yeah.
Like that's insane.
That's not pawn sacrifice. That's like, all right, we'll just lose all our rooks.
Yeah, let's just sacrifice the exchange for no reason. We're no compensation, nothing to get on this. But it's because that's not the thing he cares about. What he cares about is winning this long battle of attrition. He's got millions and millions and millions of men to just throw at the problem, and it's like they really are stats to him. And so, of course, if you go into a meeting like this, that's the problem. The problem is Putin can't be moved by the fact that he's going to lose another million guys over the next year. That just doesn't move him, right? He can't be moved by the fact that he's going to have to spend 8 to 10% of his yearly budget on defense, because it's just a numbers game to him, right? But ultimately, what does move him is he wants to save face. Of course, he wants to keep his regime in place, in control. And so, in order to do that, he's able to make demands that otherwise wouldn't, normal people wouldn't assent to. But in this case, and then Trump wouldn't assent to it if Trump was on the other side of this equation. But Trump's not on the other side of the equation. Zelensky is. Trump's just the relay, right? And so Trump has to go and say, hey, look, he's not really looking to end this thing unless we give him X, Y, and Z. My advice to you is that you do it, because otherwise in the future, maps aren't going to have the word Ukraine written on them. And that's just how it is. And I that would be a terrible tragedy. I do not want to see that, right? I hope the rest of the world do. But the only thing that Trump could do, and I would love to hear from the audience if there's any other option that they think is possible here. The only thing that Trump could do to change that equation is to say, if you don't do this, we will engage you in war directly.
Well, Europe could.
Or you're right. You could too, right? But I don't see them. I don't think they have the stones. I really just don't see them doing that without us. With us, sure, they would all, hop on that bandwagon. But I just don't see, Europe saying, you know what, France, Germany, we're going to go to war with. No, I just don't see it happening.
I see him absolutely prosecuting this war as an elite, with no concern for the common man experience, and and sealed him off from any type of consequences. And if he feels anything, he certainly doesn't show it, right? And we in the West, we value things, that the Russians don't. So it's hard for us to appreciate that. But I think ultimately, maybe he's concerned with retaining control in Russia, certainly.
Yeah.
And any type of right now, this war is helping him to do that, unless something happens in Russia that their government or other people essentially need to revolt against this and to
Yeah.
say, look, this is a war that doesn't need to be fought, and
Right.
they right. So we need to have some pushback in Russia.
And the problem is that's
What
not
we
coming.
don't know is that this is propaganda too, and with the lack of journalism, because Russia is so big, is to what extent and how well organized that opposition is. He's been he's been very strict about trying to police opposition, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just very clandestine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, so yeah, unfortunately that pushback, that like public opinion movement in Russia is what we need, but I just don't see it coming because I think that he has just such a strong vice grip of propaganda in Russia. I don't think that, like, when I reach out to the people I know, because I do business all over the world, and I have customers in Russia, and they just don't have this same like understanding of what that conflict is actually what's happening. When I talk to them about it, it's like they think they're not really at war, from what I understand. It's like they just don't feel it. Like the Ukrainians probably feel it. Because of course, one thing, the war has progressed into Ukrainian territory, not into Russian territory. So that's part of it, right? Then it's being kind of fought on the frontier, not to them. But even the random long range strikes that make it into the mainland, it's just like, sporadic and isolated. Whereas they're just feeling like, hey, and of course they're told such outrageous falsehoods from the Russian government, like, oh, we've only
Yeah.
lost like 50,000 men, when in reality it's more like, almost a million, right? Like, and likewise, Ukraine is doing the same thing, right? They all play that game. They all say like, oh, we've only lost like 10 people. Meanwhile, like all told, the casualty rate, numbers up around 2 million is from the best estimates that I can understand. And, those numbers are just so wildly different depending on where you go because the fog of war is so heavy. But yeah, in Russia, it's like they don't feel like they don't feel like they're fighting. They still just get up and go to work every day. They feel like they just get up and go to the grocery store every day. To them, they're not feeling the strain like they think they ought to. And like they've been dealing with American sanctions for like the last 17 decades or something like that. I mean, being facetious, but like the any kind of economic strain that they would normally bear is just like par for the course for them, right? So they've gotten to the point where it's just not. It just doesn't hold that same, if it's just a tactic we use all the time, even though Trump has threatened to add
Yeah.
additional sanctions and additional tariffs.
Well, yeah. I mean, the sanctions are supposed to try to hit the elites. I know they've tried to freeze bank accounts of elites and try not to make it where we're punishing the common man, things like that. But
Right.
I think more broad sanctions are what you know, and really maybe what it might be to change opinion in Russia. But
Right.
we don't understand their culture, their willingness to put up with that because they don't want to be bullied. Their willingness to put up with deprivations. Now, that's true. Comments, we're not elites. I've never
Yeah.
been to Russia. We are not privy to any classified information about Russia. I
Nope.
saw one of the people participating is from Romania. I had a good friend who had fled, sought asylum in America from Romania when it was being dominated as a puppet state by the USSR, and so I could know, the brutality of that, and
Oh
and
yeah.
the poverty that they would strip out. And so we're not trying to be cavalier about that, or cavalier about what Russia does to the puppet states, but we're trying to say, Trump in America, what do we want to achieve out of this?
Right.
Right?
Right. And
What
ultimately,
what are our interests? Our interests are to maintain the status quo of the global world order, which has us at the top, right? And
yep.
have peace in Europe, right? And so those things are obviously an interest. And
Yep.
but we're not motivated. We don't have an emotional attachment
Yeah.
to Ukraine.
Now
And
I will say I do. I have a mild emotional attachment to Ukraine, but only indirectly. It's because I have some, I'm ex-military, so I still have some friends that are actually over there fighting as mercenaries right now under the Ukrainian banner. Of course, it's unfortunate because they can't even be used like their full capability. Like these are capable soldiers with capable specialties, and they can't be used to their full extent because to use them to their full, war making capability would be to like advertise that America's fighting this war, not Ukraine is fighting this war. So they're kind of just thrown into the rest of these, I mean, for lack of a better word, kill boxes with the rest of the Ukrainians. And I hate that that's the situation. So I have a kind of a indirect vested interest in like this thing kind of coming to a close. And I think that's our goal, right? I think we want peace. I think that if America
Well, we
had,
don't. Well, Trump is definitely uninterested in America going to
yeah,
war.
we definitely don't want to go to war. And I think that, if we had originally, like, I think the Biden administration strategy was to try to bleed Russia of its resources, which ironically, by the way, the Russians began this endeavor with, I think, roughly like 3 million personnel. And right now they're sitting at about 4.5 million personnel. Because this is what happens when you go to war. Every side starts going like, oh my gosh, we're at war. Let's recruit like crazy. Let's make tanks and bombs like crazy. Let's make bullets like crazy. And that's what happens. You don't actually like usually lose troops unless one side is just that much stronger than the other. And unfortunately, these two are relatively balanced at the moment. And so, of course, if our goal was to bleed Russia dry, all that we've done is make them ramp up their military spending and make them ramp up their recruiting. So I don't know that we've ever accomplished that part of
Well,
the
all right. So
one. The only
and
thing the only thing that I was going to say that we did accomplish
sorry.
was that we exposed how unmodern their military is, which is
Yeah.
good for our situation with Russia. Unfortunately, I feel like that let China like into the secret. They're like, oh my gosh, we don't know how to fight a modern war, and so they're modernizing very quickly. So that's unfortunate, but it's a side effect.
Yeah, Russia's posturing as their military was the equal of the U.S. has been exposed as laughable.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that truth out there. But I do want to say, what was I going to say? It was right on the tip of my tongue, and then
About
I
Russia,
forgot.
our goal with Russia and trying to bleed them dry of resources and
Oh yeah. So it's common for geopolitical foes. One of the things they do is when your foe gets into a conflict, you start funding the opposition,
yeah,
right? Just to get them in a quagmire. So it's timely. So Russia now has to occupy all their attention on Ukraine. They can't further their other geopolitical goals in, say, China, India, Afghanistan, Japan, right? Right, stuff over there because they're occupied here. They can't work on their New World Order with South Africa and have this other trading alliance. They can't further dominate European energy because they're in this quagmire. That's sort of old school CIA politics. It's whoever you fund the opposition, the insurgencies of whoever your enemies are, so you don't directly engage with them, but you want to get them caught in a quagmire. I don't think that's what we're doing because where we're funding Ukraine just to slow down Russia from any of their other expansion or geopolitical things. I do feel like we Americans and Republicans that voted for the funding feel like that this is a just defense of a country, right?
okay,
And that Ukraine should definitely have a right to do that, and that's sort of the
yeah,
right thing to do. I think the benefits of it, are obviously the world stage. Russia is more despised, right? People talking about how people say death to America. People, right? Russia is like much less than America, shall we say? So they have made themselves a global pariah, right? Let's just say that. And so if Putin cares at all about his legacy, about bringing Russia out of that global doghouse, maybe Trump in his talk is willing to entice him with that. Hey, let's make if you want to be mentioned by the great Russian leaders, don't leave it where you're the worst, like the most hated country on earth because of how you treat people that speak your language, the culture that's most similar to you. Come on, we'll see. I don't know if that works, but it's definitely would be a transition to try to get Russia back onto the world stage and not just be, the niet that the USSR was for a long time, just the heel of world politics.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about. I just want to say for the record that and this was even before Christian came on board, believe it or not. But I was right about this daggone thing from the get-go. I said from moment one, I said, "Oh my gosh, Russia's going to invade. Oh my gosh, Russia's going to win this conflict. There's no way that unless we get involved personally, that there's just no way to match up to that much manpower with the disparity of personnel." I just want to say for the record that I called it. You heard it here first on Common Mansplaining, right? Before I was even called Common Mansplaining, right? Like I just want to say that we had now. I do want to kind of just go over briefly, like the history of this whole thing, and I'd like to bring Christian in on that because he's our resident historian. Why don't you tell us how this whole thing kind of got started and how this whole situation got set up?
Well, the Russia had a pipeline to supply oil to Europe that went through Ukraine. The only way, and Ukraine didn't have any of their own oil facilities built, but they reaped royalties by transporting Russian oil through Ukraine to the tune of billions of dollars.
Right.
Well, what ended up happening was they discovered large reserves of oil in the Donbass, in the Black Sea near Crimea, and closer to Moldova.
Right.
Now, and then with this money that Russia was paying to transport oil through Ukraine, with the help of some Western, like American oil experts, was going to actually try to exploit this.
Right.
And then that they could be a supplier to Europe and cut Russia out of the picture.
Right.
So Russia started reacting to that by building, the Nord Stream 2, the gas pipeline through the Baltic Sea, and explore, and one through Belarus, maybe, who's a puppet state for them. But this was very threatening to them. Their oil industry is the lifeblood of their budget, their way to project power, everything. And saw as with Ukraine being able to independently exploit their own oil rather than it being a part of Russia's oil profits together, they saw it as a betrayal. Right, for them. Right. Now, so even before that, and Ukraine, not idiots, knew this was coming. So they tried to cultivate influence in the West, right? They weren't an ally. They're not in NATO. They don't have strong military connections. They don't have natural geographical features that make their country easy to defend against invasion. Right? They don't have huge oceans or mountain ranges or anything. They're just mainly plains, kind of flat steppe. So but part of the things that they did this were what we would describe as sort of unseemly, right? Yeah. By paying off sort of influence peddlers like Hunter Biden or other people to have influence and connections, to have people think of Ukraine not as a backwater, but have the elites think of and value Ukraine, so that when ultimately, so that they could go through with this. It's sort of like, I want to build houses on, like you're playing Monopoly on a property, and your opponent's not going to be happy about that, or going to oppose you or fight you or something, whatever. So they knew that what they were going to do was going to be provocative to Russia, right? Sure. Now, obviously, from the 15th century, even the Russian Empire was ruled from Kiev for a long time. So culturally, they have a lot. Their history is basically very of the Rus and Ukraine is very, very similar. But in the 20th century, the Russians brutalized Ukraine. Yeah, right? The USSR. The famines, they really thought of the Ukrainians as, not fully, and were willing to let millions of them die to feed Russians, kind of thing. And so the Ukrainians haven't forgotten about that. This is still new history to them. And so they have always wanted autonomy since then from them. It was a big deal for them to break apart at the end of the USSR. And at first they had a leader that was loyal to aligned with Russia, but ultimately, right, they had a sort of revolution and elected somebody who was going to be pro-Western and more independent, and Russia like poisoned this guy, almost killed him, right? And ever since then, sort of there's been, right, Russia has so much connections in Ukraine. There's been a lot of sort of sabotage and corruption both ways. Because Russia really doesn't think of them as independent. They would think of them like we would think of Texas. Like Texas thinks they're a republic, but we're thinking they're part of America. They're really like, oh, whatever. Like, and we don't want, but Texas does a lot of stuff independently. It's a little bit like that. I don't want to. That's an oversimplification.
That's good.
But now, obviously, Russia felt the plans in place were a big enough threat to their global position and prestige and ultimately power and wealth that and they saw an opportunity with Biden being a weak leader in America and weakness in the West that they could do this with impunity, right? That was kind of seen. It's like, well, why not? Why not? Who's stopping us?
So yeah, and I mean, there's a lot going on here, right? Like this is just anytime these conflicts come together, it's so easy to like point at one figure and just call this person, the bad guy, this person the good guy, and this person, And I think obviously it's clear that if this situation has a bad guy, obviously it's Putin, right? He certainly came in and invaded without much provocation, if any, right? But the other thing to understand is America's influence in this, and there's a lot of history there. One of the things to remember is that when the breakup of the USSR took place, that there was a Budapest referendum, right? And so, of course, we, as part of the nuclear proliferation, we said, listen, we don't want that many different nations having nukes. So, and Ukraine had like I think 1,400 of them, a lot. Like they had a lot. They were like the third or maybe I think they were the third largest nuke country, right, at the time, right behind us and Russia. And so we were like, listen, can you give them all back? And there's kind of like this tenuous understanding that if that was done, that their sovereignty would just be respected. And it wasn't just us.
Well, it was Clinton, wasn't it, who said we will help guarantee your border integrity.
Yeah,
if you give up your nukes.
Not only Clinton, but Russia. Russia even said, yes, we will respect your border integrity. But of course, there was also a bunch of undertones, so it was kind of weird, right? And although it wasn't a military defense treaty, it wasn't like a security guarantee, but it was definitely like, we're like, look, understanding that you're giving up this heavy defensive, material, this heavy defensive armament, this deterrent, we're going to respect you and you're always going to be fine. And then, of course, several years down the line, this rolls. But of course, it's been a long time. And one question I wanted to ask you is, how long does an agreement like this last on the international stage? Because
what's the warranty?
Does it last 20 years? Does it last 30 years? Does it last 70? Does it last 200? At some point, I have to imagine that the global world situation has just changed so much that it's like this is just no longer in our interest. Just like I mean, at one point in time, Baker was quoted as saying, like, look, we're not going to move not 1 inch east. And of course, at the time, he probably meant it, right? But
that's true.
Over time, and that again wasn't an official treaty. It wasn't like him saying, we promise and we sign here. But he said it, and Russia probably does feel some kind of way about us moving east and then moving east and then moving east and then moving east. And at some point, we weren't very happy when Russia moved into Cuba, right?
No, we were not. We're still not.
Yeah, right. At some point, we have to be, we have to be cognizant of all the different variables here. And I just wonder how long does an agreement like that last before we revisit it, or we say, look, this is just no longer.
I mean, James Baker, that was under the first George Bush presidency. So obviously that he's making a statement about the current administration goals, right? But well, that was taken as, okay, everybody thought George Bush the first was going to win a re-election for sure, right? But Ross Perot came along and torpedoed that. And so then the Clinton administration came in, was not interested in keeping any of the commitments that James Baker made. They wanted to set their own thing. So they they loved the idea that they could put in their legacy, hey, we added Poland to NATO. We added, Slovenia to all these countries to NATO. It was a big foreign policy thing, and damn the consequences. And Russia wasn't strong enough at that point to do anything about it.
Right.
They were seen as so weak. Their economy was still recovering, still modernizing. Right. They were seen as like, the geopolitical equivalent of Spain. Like nobody really did anything with think like, well, how is Spain going to think about this? Like, no, they just so so obviously then we get under the Obama years. Now all of a sudden, Putin takes Crimea,
right,
and Obama is called on. All right, well, are you going to step up for what Bill Clinton said?
No,
Democratic Party, and he's like,
well, and on that note, right? So this is these are just more variables. Of course, one of the reasons that the Crimea situation took place is because we essentially toppled the Ukrainian government because they were pro-Russia, and so this is just so much. I'll be the first one to tell you that I do not like interventionism. Right? I'm just not an interventionist fan. I'm not going to say that it's not the objectively best way to do things. It might be. I don't know. But I just, it gets under my skin. I feel like every nation, deserves their own self-determination. And it always seems to bother me whenever America.
So interventionism, I mean, intervening in their elections to try to throw our support or around one candidate that's more pro that we like better, something like that.
I mean, I really don't feel like that's our from a principled standpoint. I don't think that's our business. Now, do we have a vested interest in doing so? I acknowledge that we do, right? I acknowledge that democracy is better for Western values, is better for trade, is better for commerce than having dictators in office. But of course, in our situation, we toppled the Ukrainian government, who had a free and fair election to put this guy in office, and we basically replaced him with the dictator just because he was a little bit more pro-US. And so, again, and then Putin's like, whoa. It's one thing for you guys to move east 17 times with NATO. It's another thing for you literally to take our ally away and replace him with yours right next door. I can't say that I don't approve of any single thing that Putin does. But I can't say I don't understand it. I do. I do understand what he's doing, and it really bothers me. We get
this is what I would tell Vlad, that he might say that, but the U.S. and the West has no interest in invading and occupying Russia, right?
Right.
And we have a track record, right? When we were in Europe, we gave all that territory back. We could have kept it. Conquer it. We're not interested in conquering. We just, we don't want to get in a land war in Asia, to quote The Princess Bride. We're not interested in that. We don't want your territory. We don't want to govern it. We want we want you to live in peace with us. But we see it obviously as the Ukraine wanting to accept the world order with us at the top, trade with us, buy weapons from us, be more friendly with the West. He sees it as, now this is a staging point for invasion into Russia. And we can be, there's nothing less interesting to us than invading Russia. Right.
It's just like a frozen waste.
Nobody wants to do that. No, I mean, you would find zero people in the military or in America that want to invade Russia. Right. And even fewer people in Europe who want to invade Russia. But he's still saying, no, this is about my defense. I'm worried about being invaded. We don't take that credibly because we see within ourselves we have no interest in that. But I can see how him feeling, hey, now I have these enemies at the door because of, the USSR was so big and now that's all collapsed. It's a different feeling, right? Yeah.
Now, yeah. So I mean, there's just so much going on with this thing, and I really, like I said, I don't approve of the way that Putin has managed anything. Really, I mean, I think there's so many other options, and I really just wish though that we would kind of stay away from it. This is the kind of thing where I feel like out of the three options, right after washing our hands of the situation, getting involved directly in fighting a hot war, or slow walking aid. I feel like the first one was probably best. Although the second one is a close second. Like, I really wish that if we're going to get involved, that we just go all in, right? Like, I really don't like doing the whole like pity pat stuff. Like, I feel like if we're going to get involved and we're going to say, because that's the only leverage I really feel like Trump had in this meeting, right? I feel like if he was going to get some kind of concession, because everybody on the left wants him to just miraculously get Putin to just give back all of the land that he's already conquered, which is delusional, right? That is just not going to happen
Without force.
Unless the only way that happens is if Trump goes into the meeting and says, listen, you really need to give the land back, and if you don't, we're going to go to war. That's the only thing that stops it. Other than that, there's just no, because I mean, it's crazy because like now Trump goes back to Zelensky and says, listen, we're going to probably do some land swaps or something. You're going to have to make some concessions. And the truth is that if Zelensky doesn't take that opportunity, and if we don't go to war directly with Russia, the only thing that happens is the balance between, let's say this is Russia and this is Ukraine, is Russia just slowly whittles away until the next deal that comes along is even worse. And the next deal that comes along is even worse. And it's just kind of like Israel and Gaza. It's like, how many times has Gaza passed up on a peace deal only to like beg for that peace deal like 10 years later? And it's like, well, darn it, stop fighting against it. At some point you have to realize when you do and don't have the leverage. And I hate that Putin has the leverage. And if we're going to take it away, we need to take it away. We can't just like ask him to give it up.
No. I mean, so a couple things. So Joseph in the chat said if we get involved like that, that's the end of the world. I don't necessarily think that. If our aims are that we're just going to help Ukraine defend themselves and get back Ukrainian territory, right? I don't think that's necessarily will trigger nuclear end of the world kind of scenarios. But again, I'm not in control. I do want you to have a scenario that kind of amuses me. I want you to think about. So Trump comes back and says, after talking with, sizing up Putin, he says what you said. The only way that we're going to get this is if America declares war in the defense of Ukraine with our aims to restore Ukrainian integrity and defense, and goes to Congress and asks Congress, it said, but I won't commit any troops unless Congress votes to declare war on Russia.
Okay.
How are Democrats going to vote on that?
Right.
If they've owned Ukraine, are they going to vote to go to war against Ukraine?
I don't think they have the stones. And here's the funny part.
No, they do not.
It's a darned if you do, darned if you don't. Like, let's say Trump did that. Let's say he's like, I threaten that if you don't give this land, because they want him to get the land back. And let's say he does it, right? Let's say he's just like, listen, if you don't do this, I'm going to press my little red button that Trump is so proud of talking about. And then it's like, there's Trump being authoritarian again, offering to fight forces without congressional approval. And it's like, what do you want from the dude? Like, there's
let's say, he goes back to Congress for approval on that. Like, are they going to approve?
No.
I mean, he should almost dare them to say, look, don't give me a hard time about Ukraine. I asked if you wanted to declare war. You voted no. I'm accepting your will. We're not going to war. No more intervention. That would kind of clear things out and give clarity. He should say, Congress, declare war or we're out. No, none of this hemming and hawing. That would be awesome.
Yeah, but it's not going to obviously. But I mean, and you're right. Joseph, you're right. It is true that if we, go to war directly, I think Putin may find himself cornered. But I think there are alternatives, like where you declare war without declaring it. Like one option I thought of, and this is, I think, an out that we had early in the conflict, probably not so much anymore. What we could have done, like in March of 22 or April or June maybe, is say, all right, we induct Ukraine into NATO, period. Like, we've accepted them. Then Putin's in a weird spot. Then he has to stop immediately or trigger Article 5. That would have been one option that I could think of. And back then I kind of recommended it. I said, look, you don't actually have to declare war, but if you fast track Ukraine into, which we don't really want. We don't really want Ukraine in NATO, but if we did it, it would kind of put Putin in a spot where he's like, ooh. Now every attack, every missile lobbed is a missile lobbed into NATO territory. It's like, then that's why I said from the beginning that the left was whining about, after Putin takes over, Ukraine, then he's going to take Poland, and then he's going to take Norway. And so I'm like, no, he's not. That's ridiculous. Like, for Putin to attack NATO proper is just not. People think that Putin's crazy. He's not crazy. He's evil.
He's bogged down. He's bogged down in Ukraine. Like, there's a lot of people fear-mongering and said that he could invade Estonia or Lithuania. So they have defense more than they're willing to disclose. But he can't do that when he's bogged down in Ukraine.
Now, if he had to fight NATO, if he had to, he would take Estonia and Lithuania very quickly, but he would have to stop there. Like, nothing else is that soft of a target. Right, like that would just be a requirement for his defense. He would have to like really go into go mode and make some very aggressive, very wild, risky moves. And those would be from what Colonel McGregor says, he would have to. Those would be moves that he would have to make. Now, but he wouldn't do that because that would be attacking NATO, right? But that would only be something where, like, if NATO attacked him and put him on the defensive, then he would have to start making some more aggressive moves. But only to bring himself to a negotiating strength, where he could get himself out of the situation. But I really there's so many different options and there's so many different war games that can be played here, but I really don't. Nuclear conflict is a long shot, even if there's a direct conflict, but the long shot jumps from like 0.2% to like 15%, which is like way, I think 0.2% is too high. Like right now, I think we're already in a place where it could happen. And if we get into
I think the thing we don't know is how propagandized, how much support Putin has in Russia that they would support him nuking Ukraine.
Well, they don't. So from what I understand, and this is indirect information. It's just from my friends, from people I do business with.
Understand.
They don't really have like in America, whether we actually have the power of the people, we feel like we do. We kind of pretend we do, right? Like we can say, oh no, there'll be an uproar and we'll just stop the public will stop Congress from going to war if there's just not enough public sentiment behind it. But in Russia, it's not like that. It's you either have oligarch support or you don't. And they don't really care about the common man like we do, but in Russia, it's just if you have the support of like the top social strata, then you can do it. And if you don't, you can't. But like he's much more insulated from the will of the people than like our president is, for example. Yeah. But
so why should average people who are not military, who are not involved, don't profit off this conflict? What should we hope for? Right, peace for peace sake, or should we hope resolution for resolution's sake? I mean, does your life change if Ukraine loses this war? Does your life change if Russia loses this war? How is that really going to impact us? That's my question.
My life changes if the war stops. Indirectly, but it changes if the war stops. Because if the war stops, we stop throwing money at it. And I think that's the whole thing, right? Like right now, we've got so many problems at home that we just don't need to solve the rest of that's just some. I'm just going to keep saying that for the rest of my life. We have so many issues here that we don't need to solve the rest of the world's problems. I don't have a problem with helping out. I don't have a problem with, especially if they, this is if they're an ally, right? Like if there's somebody who we have a vested interest in helping, like Israel at least has a direct security guarantee with us, so they are an official military ally, and I think that the fact that Trump, has the mineral deal with Ukraine gives us a minor vested interest in at least their well-being, at least creating a situation where if there's a negotiation that that Ukraine holds on to enough land where they can actually supply us with the minerals that we, traded for, essentially, that we agreed that we've already bought with arms and stuff like that. But aside from that, I don't think, if Ukraine is no longer on any map, doesn't really change my life much as long as the war is over. But I would feel bad. I wouldn't want, any more life to be lost than needs to be lost. And it's already so costly, heavy. Like
I think the region will always be known as the Ukraine. Ukraine resents that. They don't want it to be called the Ukraine. They want to call Ukraine their sovereign nation and not just the Ukrainian region of Russia. But that's always going to be called Ukraine, the Ukraine. But yeah, I mean, but they're going to have to step up and show that they're a real nation without corruption, right? And fighting for your independence. We had to go through it. Fighting for your independence is a good place to form a national identity and get some street cred.
Right. So what do y'all? What do y'all think? Aside from the emotional attachment, right, which has been
separate emotion.
Right, has been and understandably, you can't not have emotion when there's so many people dying, right? That's just I feel it, you feel it, we all feel it. But aside from the emotional attachment, like, what do y'all think? Does it actually matter in our lives here in America if who went? Like, if Ukraine tomorrow, marches on Moscow, I'm like, all right, the war's over. You know what I mean? It doesn't really change anything for me. It probably changes some other things globally, right? It changes. All right. So if Russia topples, it changes the power balance in BRICS, right? Which might help. Which, these are like really indirect, but that's the only other thing I can think of. One thing I am actually honestly scared of, like one of the things I worry about, is that America loses the reserve currency. If we lose our petrodollar, then, if you look at like history, the Danish had the reserve currency when they were on top. The British had the UK had reserve currency when they were on top. Rome had the reserve currency when they were on top. Everybody who's been on top has the reserve currency. And the moment they don't, their being on top very, very quickly, coasts out of the picture. So I want to keep that as long as we can. I think that's pivotal.
Well, yes, this is the Democrats want to be in a state of decline and are fine with that going away. Trump wants to make America great again and maintain that preeminence and status. Anyway, interesting topic. I know it's hard for us when we think about something that is so random, like. But it is in the news. Trump has involved. He has taken upon himself. America is involved. It does affect us. It affects our tax dollars.
Right.
We should, we should think about this. We should and comment on it. Our voice should be heard. If we were gonna say we had our senator, the North Carolina senators, on our show, and they asked, "Oh, okay, what would you guys like us to do when it comes to Ukraine? Do we have a clear position that we would want to even advocate for?" Just end it.
Just end it. Yeah. Less war. Less war. Can we all agree that less war is a good thing? I think that that's a safe compromise in any territory on any side of the aisle, I think. As far as this meeting is concerned, I don't know what people were hoping for, but what exactly can Trump do other than to threaten all-out war, or to that's the only thing. Threatening sanctions and stuff, he did that, right? Just so everybody knows, after this meeting, Trump was like, all right, the deadline is reduced, now they've got 12 days to find some kind of settlement, or I'm probably gonna add sanctions and additional tariffs, which is his magic word for everything, right? It's tariff. He probably tariffs his kids or so, I don't know. He just likes tariff a lot. But anyway, guys, thank you so much, and thank you for watching. We do this every Wednesday and Saturday. We're at 9 now, probably permanently, unless this doesn't work for people, and then just give us your feedback. But if you guys have a topic or something you'd like to see us do, definitely let us know. And we appreciate your support. We appreciate your viewership. Thanks so much. We'll catch you next time. Common Mansplaining.
You're my soda.